When did you realize you were in a hostage situation? I climbed into the Uber outside the airport knowing I just wanted to get home. Had a safe trip? The driver's voice made me freeze. Something terrifying nagged at the back of my mind as I studied his face in the rearview mirror. Mid-40s, graying beard, and balding more than LeBron. I knew him from somewhere but couldn't place it. It was fine. Thankfully, this drive should only take about 20 minutes. He nodded and pulled away from the curb. But instead of following the GPS mounted on his dashboard, he took the first exit heading east, the opposite direction from my apartment. The automated voice immediately started recalculating. I think you missed the turn. Shortcut. Construction on the main route. I pulled out my phone to check traffic. No construction alerts, no delays. The usual route showed green all the way home. Meanwhile, we were heading into an industrial area I didn't recognize. Warehouses and empty lots replaced the familiar streets. Actually, can you just follow the GPS? I'm in a hurry. He met my eyes in the mirror again. I swear he looked familiar, but I still couldn't place him. My hand moved to the door handle instinctively. We were going 40 miles per hour through empty streets. Janice, you don't remember me, do you? My blood ran cold. I hadn't given him my name. The app showed me as just Jay. My fingers fumbled with my phone, trying to share my location with someone, anyone. But there was no signal out here. How do you know my name? We've met before. Several times, actually. You really don't recognize me? I studied his face harder while calculating if I could jump out at the next stop sign. Those eyes, that voice. Where had I seen him? My mind raced through possibilities. Old coworkers, college acquaintances, people from my hometown. I used to look different. Had more hair, less weight. You were kind to me when no one else was. The car slowed as we approached a red light. I gripped the door handle, ready to bolt, but he clicked something and I heard the locks engage. Child safety locks. I couldn't get out from inside. Let me out. Now. Not yet. She's been waiting so long to see you again. Who's been waiting? He turned onto an even more desolate road. Empty factories lined both sides. No other cars. No witnesses. My phone remained dead despite showing half battery. I started recording video anyway, hoping it would save locally. Your college roommate, Kelsey. You remember her, right? Kelsey. The name hit me like ice water. My freshman year roommate who'd had a breakdown during finals week. Who'd become manic obsessed with me after I helped her through some tough times. Who'd been institutionalized after she attacked and almost called her next roommate for replacing me. Kelsey's been in psychiatric care for 8 years. Released 6 months ago. Doing much better now. Has her own place and everything. The pieces clicked. The familiar face. He was the TA from our freshman psychology class who'd always paid too much attention to Kelsey and me. Who'd shown up at our dorm at weird hours to check on Kelsey's mental health. Who'd been fired for inappropriate conduct. You're the TA. He smiled at recognition. Took you long enough. Though I go by Dave Johnson now. Had to change it after that unfortunate misunderstanding at the university. This is kidnapping. People know where I am. No, they think you're headed home. Your phone's been spoofing your location since you got in. You're almost there according to anyone tracking you. We pulled up to a small house at the end of a dirt road. One light glowed in the front window. A figure moved behind the curtain and my stomach dropped. Even in silhouette, I recognized Kelsey's distinctive posture. She talks about you every day. Says you were the only real friend she ever had. She tried to hurt people. She needs help. She got help. Now she just wants to reconnect with her best friend. He parked and turned to face me fully. That's when I noticed the knife in his hand. Not threatening, just resting on his thigh, making a point about my options. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go inside and have a nice dinner with Kelsey. Catch up on old times. Make her happy, then I'll drive you home. And if I don't? Kelsey gets very upset when she's disappointed. Last time someone disappointed her, well, that's why we had to get her in hiding from the police. He ushered me out of the car. My feet hit the gravel and I stood slowly, buying myself seconds to think while Dave moved behind me. The house looked small and run down, paint peeling on the porch, but I could see Kelsey's shape moving fast behind the curtain like she couldn't wait any longer. I walked forward, each step feeling wrong, while my brain went through options. Run now and he catches me in seconds with that knife. Scream and there's nobody around to hear. Play along and maybe find a chance later. Dave stayed close enough that I felt his presence like a weight pushing me forward. The porch steps creaked under my shoes and I kept my face blank, not showing the panic racing through my body. The front door swung open before I even reached it and there she was. Kelsey looked so different from the girl I remembered. Way thinner, almost sick-looking, with hair down past her shoulders that needed washing. But her eyes got huge and bright when she saw me, like I was the best thing she'd ever seen. She rushed forward and grabbed me in a hug that squeezed too tight, her arms shaking. I made myself hug back even though my skin crawled, made myself smile. She pulled back and held my shoulders, studying my face. I managed to get words out past the fear in my throat, telling her it was good to see her too. She smiled so big it looked painful and pulled me inside by the hand. The house hit me with weirdness right away. Everything was super clean, like hospital clean, but nothing matched. A brown couch next to a floral chair next to a metal table. Heavy dark curtains covered every window I could see, blocking out the evening light. Kelsey led me straight to a small dining table set up with 3 places, actual cloth napkins and lit candles like this was some kind of celebration dinner. Behind me, I heard Dave come in and shut the door, then the sound of multiple locks clicking into place. Heavy bolts, maybe 4 or 5 of them. I glanced at the nearest window while Kelsey pulled out a chair for me and saw wooden boards screwed right into the wall over the glass from the inside. They'd prepared this place to keep someone in. Kelsey gestured to the chair and I sat, forcing my voice to stay normal and friendly while I told her how nice her place looked. She started talking fast, words tumbling over each other about how long she'd been waiting for this, and how much she'd missed our friendship, and how happy she was that we could finally spend time together again. I nodded and smiled, making the right sounds, while my eyes scanned everything in the room. A phone hung on the kitchen wall, but the cord lay unplugged on the counter. No cell phone visible anywhere. The windows all boarded. The door locked from inside with serious hardware. Dave moved around the table and sat across from me, and that's when I saw him set the knife down right next to his plate. Not threatening with it, just placing it there like silverware, making sure I understood my situation. Kelsey went to the stove and came back with a big pot of pasta, her hands shaking as she served it onto our plates. The shaking could be excitement or maybe medication side effects. She put a decent-sized portion on my plate and smiled at me, waiting for me to try it. I picked up my fork and took a small bite, made myself chew and swallow even though my stomach felt like a rock. I told her the food was really good and she beamed at me. My heart pounded so hard I thought they might hear it. Kelsey started asking me questions, dozens of them, about my job and where I lived and what I'd been doing for the past 8 years. I answered carefully, keeping everything vague, not giving real addresses or specific details about my life. She remembered tiny things from freshman year that I'd completely forgotten, the color of the comforter on my bed, what time I usually got back from my Tuesday classes, the name of the guy I went on 2 dates with in October. She recited these memories like they were precious treasures, describing normal, everyday college stuff like it was this deep, meaningful friendship. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I understood what had happened in her mind. She'd taken our regular roommate relationship and built this whole fantasy around it, turned casual interactions into something huge and important. Dave watched us both while he ate, looking satisfied with how things were going. After a while, I asked quietly if I could use the bathroom, keeping my voice polite. Dave stood up right away and walked me down a narrow hallway, stopping outside a door and waiting there while I went in. I shut the door and looked around fast. Small bathroom, toilet and sink, and a tiny window above the bathtub. The window had boards over it from this side too, painted the same color as the wall to blend in. They'd planned for someone trying to escape this way. I opened the cabinet under the sink and found cleaning supplies and towels. I pulled out my lipstick from my pocket and made a small mark on the inside of the cabinet door, way in the back where someone would only see it if they really looked. Maybe somebody would find it later, maybe not, but I had to try something. I flushed the toilet and ran water to make it sound normal. When I came out, Dave was right there, watching me with suspicious eyes. We walked back to the dining room where Kelsey had cleared the plates. I noticed a scrapbook sitting on a side table now that I hadn't seen before. Dark blue cover, thick with pages. Kelsey saw me looking at it and got excited, grabbing it and bringing it over to show me. She opened it and I felt my stomach drop. Photos of me. Lots of them. Some I recognized from social media, pictures I'd posted over the years, but others I'd never seen before. Taken around campus when I didn't know anyone was watching. Me walking to class, me at the library, me at the coffee shop, all printed out and arranged carefully with dates written underneath in neat handwriting. The obsession went way deeper than I'd thought. She'd been focused on me for 8 solid years, collecting pieces of my life like I was the only thing that mattered. Kelsey started turning pages slowly, pointing at each photo and telling me exactly what I'd been wearing that day, and where I was going. She remembered details I couldn't possibly remember myself. Dave sat back and watched this whole thing with pride on his face, like he was happy about her dedication. I made appropriate sounds, saying things like, "Wow," and "I can't believe you kept all this," while my brain worked on a different problem. I could see that Kelsey's attachment to me was strong, maybe stronger than whatever she felt for Dave. If I could drive a wedge between them, make her choose me over him, maybe I'd have a chance. I asked Kelsey if I could see the rest of her house, acting interested and excited. She jumped up immediately, so eager to show me everything. Dave stood too and followed as she led me through the small space. She showed me her bedroom with more photos of us from college on the walls. The kitchen with special snacks she'd bought because she remembered they were my favorites freshman year. A closet where she'd kept items from our dorm room, things I didn't even remember existed. A lamp, some books, a poster. While she talked, I looked out the back window and saw the bathroom window from outside. The boards over it weren't as secure as they looked from inside, just painted to seem sealed. If I could get back in there alone, I might be able to work them loose. In her bedroom, I saw more photos of us from college covering one whole wall, but what caught my attention was the nightstand next to her bed. 3 prescription bottles sat there in a neat row with labels dated from last month. A pill organizer sat beside them with compartments for each day of the week, some still full and some empty. I moved closer and read the labels without being too obvious about it. Antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, anxiety medication. All current prescriptions from a local psychiatrist. I turned to Kelsey and asked softly how she was doing with everything, keeping my voice gentle and genuinely curious. She sat down on the edge of her bed and started talking about her therapy sessions, how she goes twice a week and works on recognizing her thoughts and managing her responses. Her voice got quieter as she explained the coping strategies she'd learned and how hard it was some days to tell what was real and what her brain was making up. For just a minute, she sounded exactly like the scared 18-year-old I'd lived with freshman year, the one who would cry in our room at night because her mind wouldn't stop racing. I felt actual sympathy rise up in my chest despite the fear, seeing this person who was sick and struggling and had been let down by everyone who should have helped her. Dave's voice cut through the moment like a knife. He stood in the doorway demanding my phone, his tone sharp and aggressive enough that even Kelsey flinched backward on the bed. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it out to him, watching as he powered it down completely before shoving it deep into his front pocket. He said something about privacy and helping me focus on reconnecting with Kelsey, but the way he said it made clear this wasn't a request I could refuse. Kelsey's whole posture changed in an instant. Her breathing got faster and her hands started gripping the bedspread. She told Dave he was being rude to their guest and needed to stop talking to me like that. I saw the opening in their relationship, the crack where her attachment to me was stronger than her fear of him. I thanked her quietly for standing up for me, making sure my voice carried genuine gratitude and warmth. She looked at me and nodded, her jaw set in a way that reminded me she could be stubborn when she wanted to be. We walked back to the living room and I could feel the tension rolling off both of them. Kelsey sat down on the couch, but her hands wouldn't stay still, picking at the fabric and then moving to her lap and then back to the couch. Her breathing was getting faster by the second, that shallow, quick pattern I remembered from college when she was heading toward a full panic attack. I sat down next to her and spoke in the calmest voice I could manage, asking her to look around the room and tell me 5 things she could see. She looked at me confused at first, but then started naming things. The lamp, the curtains, the coffee table, Dave's jacket on the chair, the scrapbook. Her breathing started to slow as she focused on each object. I kept talking to her in that same steady voice, telling her she was doing great and to keep going, to notice the colors and shapes of what she was seeing. Dave stood across the room watching us with obvious anger on his face. He didn't like that I could help her when he couldn't, that she responded to my voice and my techniques instead of needing him. I kept all my attention on Kelsey, helping her feel safe and connected to me, making sure Dave stayed on the outside of what we were doing. After a few more minutes, her hands stopped shaking and her breathing returned to normal. She looked at me with gratitude and something else, maybe recognition that I actually remembered her and cared about what happened to her. I waited until she seemed fully calm before carefully suggesting that maybe I could step outside for a minute to get some fresh air since the house felt pretty warm. Dave's response came fast and hard. He said it wasn't safe out there and we needed to stay inside where he could keep us secure. Kelsey's face fell with disappointment, but she didn't argue with him, just looked down at her hands. I realized in that moment that she was more afraid of Dave than I'd initially understood, that he had control over her in ways that went beyond just helping with her illness. I looked toward the front window and noticed something I hadn't seen before. A porch light glowed at a house across the empty lot, maybe 200 yards away through the darkness. It was the first real sign of other people nearby that I'd seen since we arrived. I mentioned it casually, saying I hadn't realized there were neighbors so close. Kelsey said an older couple lived there, but they mostly kept to themselves and didn't bother anyone. I filed that information away in my mind, knowing that house might be my only chance if I could get outside. I pressed my hand against my stomach and told Kelsey I wasn't feeling well, that I needed to use the bathroom again. Dave's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but he stood up and gestured down the hallway. He followed me again, his footsteps heavy behind me on the old floorboards. Inside the bathroom, I closed the door and immediately went to the window above the bathtub. I ran my fingers along the frame as quietly as I could, testing how secure it really was. The boards on the outside were painted to look permanent, but the actual window frame underneath moved slightly when I pushed on it. The wood was old and somewhat rotted where it met the sill. I gripped the frame and tried to slide the window open behind the boards, moving as slowly and carefully as possible. The old wood creaked loud enough that I froze instantly. Dave pounded on the door hard enough to rattle it in the frame, yelling to ask what I was doing in there. My heart jumped into my throat as I flushed the toilet fast and turned on the water in the sink, calling back that I'd knocked over some bottles from the shelf and was picking them up. I arranged a few items on the counter to make it look disturbed and tried to steady my breathing. When I opened the door, Dave pushed past me into the small bathroom, his eyes scanning every surface. I stood in the hallway watching him check the window, the cabinet, the space behind the toilet. He found nothing obviously wrong, but when he turned back to look at me, his expression was pure suspicion. Kelsey appeared at the end of the hallway asking if everything was okay, her voice worried. I assured her I'd just felt sick from all the traveling, but I was feeling better now, forcing a small smile onto my face. We walked back toward the living room together, Kelsey's hand briefly touching my shoulder like she wanted to make sure I was really there and really okay. Dave followed behind us, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the old wooden floor. I kept my breathing steady and my face calm, even though my mind was racing through every possible escape route and signal I could try. Back in the living room, I glanced around looking for anything useful while Kelsey guided me back toward the dining table. That's when I spotted it sitting on the side table near the couch. Dave's driver's license in a clear plastic holder, probably fallen out of his wallet earlier. The photo was definitely him, same graying beard and balding head, but the name printed on the card read, Daniel Webb, not Dave Johnson like he'd told me in the car. My stomach dropped as I realized he was using a completely fake identity for the rideshare service. That's how he'd been able to track passengers and approach people without getting caught. The rideshare company thought they'd verified Daniel Webb, had no idea Dave Johnson even existed. I looked away quickly before he noticed me staring, filing this information away as something the police would need to know if I ever got out of here. Kelsey asked if I wanted more water, and I nodded, using the moment to think. The candles on the table were burning lower now, making the room feel even more closed in and dark. I rubbed my arms like I was cold, and mentioned that the candlelight was pretty, but making me feel a bit trapped since I'd been in airports and planes all day with artificial lighting. Kelsey's face immediately showed concern, asking what would make me more comfortable. I suggested maybe we could sit by the front window where there was more natural light from outside, Even though it was dark now, the streetlight might help. She agreed right away, clearly wanting to make sure I felt good about being here. We moved to a small couch positioned near the front window, and I made sure to sit on the side closest to the glass where anyone outside could see me if they looked this way. Dave settled into a chair across the room, his eyes never leaving us for more than a few seconds. Kelsey started talking about her plans for us to spend more time together, maybe going to lunch or visiting the park like we used to do during study breaks freshman year. Her voice had this excited but fragile quality, like she was afraid I might disappear if she stopped talking. While she described all the places she wanted to take me, I lifted my hand and started tapping my fingers against the window glass in a deliberate pattern. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 quick taps again. It was probably pointless since I doubted anyone was watching, but I was running out of options and had to try something. Dave's expression shifted across the room, his eyes narrowing as he watched me. He didn't say anything yet, but I could see his jaw tightening with anger. I kept my face turned toward Kelsey like I was completely focused on what she was saying, nodding and making small sounds of agreement while my fingers continued their pattern against the cold glass. Kelsey talked about a new coffee shop that opened near her therapy office, and how she thought I'd really like their pastries. I was about to respond when Dave suddenly stood up and announced he needed me to record a quick video message. His tone left no room for argument. He walked over and handed me his phone with the camera already open and ready to record. He said I should just tell people I was fine and visiting an old friend, that everything was great and I'd be home soon. My hands shook slightly as I took the phone, knowing this was probably going to get sent to someone tracking my location, or worried about me. I held the camera up and started recording, forcing my voice to sound calm and normal. I said I was doing fine, just catching up with my college friend Kelsey, and that I'd be home later tonight. Then I added that it reminded me of when my childhood dog Rusty used to wait by the door for me to come home from the school, how good it felt to reconnect with old friends like this. I handed the phone back to Dave, watching his face as he reviewed the video. He seemed satisfied, nodding to himself as he watched it play back, but Kelsey's expression had changed completely. She was staring at me with confusion and something that looked almost like hurt. She said she didn't remember me ever mentioning having a dog, especially one named Rusty. Her voice had an edge to it now, uncertain and questioning. I forced out a laugh and said I was just being silly, making a random joke because I was nervous. But I could see her mind working behind her eyes, trying to figure out why I would lie about something so specific and weird. Dave pocketed his phone without seeming to notice anything wrong with what I'd said, completely missing the significance of my made-up detail. He told Kelsey to relax, that I was probably just tired from traveling. But Kelsey wasn't letting it go that easily. She leaned forward and asked me directly why I would make up a story about a pet that never existed. Her voice was rising with emotion now, and I realized I'd accidentally triggered exactly the kind of feeling she struggled with, the sense of being tested or deceived by people she trusted. My heart started pounding as I saw her getting more upset. I quickly apologized and said it was a nervous mistake, that I was feeling overwhelmed by the surprise of seeing her again after so many years, and I'd mixed up my memories. I explained that sometimes when I'm stressed I say random things that don't make sense, and I was really sorry for confusing her. My explanation seemed to work. Kelsey's shoulders relaxed and she nodded slowly, accepting that I was just stressed and mixed up from all the traveling and emotion. I suggested we should share some real memories from our freshman year instead, actually reconnect properly by talking about things that really happened. Her face brightened immediately at this idea. She started talking about our dorm room and how we decorated it with posters and string lights, about the terrible cafeteria food we'd complained about together, about staying up late studying for our psychology midterm. I joined in, adding details I actually remembered about our RA, who was always doing room checks, about the broken heater that made our room freezing in January, about the campus coffee shop where we'd spend hours between classes. As we talked, something genuine started happening despite the horrible circumstances. We were actually connecting over real shared experiences, building rapport that felt authentic even though I was terrified and looking for any chance to escape. While Kelsey was distracted with a happy memory about our psychology professor's weird habit of wearing the same sweater every Friday, I glanced down and noticed the landline phone cord on the floor near the wall. It was unplugged from the phone jack, just lying there maybe 2 feet away from where it should connect. I shifted my position on the couch slightly, stretching like my back was stiff, and used my foot to push the cord a few inches closer to the jack. It wasn't fully connected, but it was closer now, and maybe if I got another chance later I could finish the job. Kelsey kept talking about funny things that happened in our dorm, completely unaware of what I was doing. But Dave noticed. He got up immediately and walked over to check what I was doing, his eyes scanning the floor and wall. He spotted the phone cord in a different position than before, and his face went dark with anger. He bent down and unplugged the cord completely from the phone, then yanked it out of the wall jack entirely. He walked out of the room carrying the whole cord with him, taking away my small hope of making a call. I kept my face neutral, not wanting him to see how much this setback hurt. When Dave came back a minute later, Kelsey had moved on to talking about wanting to show me something special. She got up and retrieved a journal from a shelf, a thick notebook with a worn cover that looked like it had been handled many times. She sat back down next to me and opened it carefully, explaining she'd kept this since college and wanted to share some of it with me. As she turned through the pages, I saw they were filled with entries about missing me and wanting to reconnect. The handwriting changed throughout, sometimes neat and careful, sometimes messy and rushed like it was written during emotional moments. She let me read selected pages, her finger pointing out specific entries. One from 3 years ago talked about how the other girls in her treatment program didn't understand her like I had, how she felt alone even surrounded by people. Another from 5 years ago described a dream where we were back in our dorm room studying together, and everything felt safe and normal. As I read more entries, I started understanding something that made this whole situation even harder. Her attack on her next roommate hadn't been random crazy violence like I'd thought. The entries showed it happened after that girl made fun of Kelsey for talking about me too much, called her pathetic for being hung up on someone who'd moved on. The attack came from feeling abandoned and replaced, from genuine pain and loneliness that her illness made impossible to process in a healthy way. The journal revealed a person who'd been suffering alone for years, whose obsession with me was wrapped up in the only time she'd felt truly accepted and safe. It didn't make what was happening okay or excuse Dave's actions, but it made me see Kelsey as more than just the scary, obsessed person from my memory. Dave closed the journal and set it on the coffee table, then sat down right next to Kelsey on her other side, so I was sort of trapped between them. He put his arm around her shoulders and started talking about how he'd been there for her through everything, visiting her every week during treatment and helping her work through her feelings. His voice had this weird, proud quality to it, like he was showing off a project he'd completed. He went on about how he'd supported her recovery and made sure she stayed focused on what mattered most, which was apparently our friendship and the connection we'd had freshman year. I felt my stomach turn as I listened, because this wasn't someone helping a person heal and move forward. This was someone who'd been feeding her obsession for 8 years straight, keeping her stuck in the past and dependent on him. He talked about encouraging her to write in the journal and remember all the good times with me, about helping her plan for the day we'd reconnect. Every word made it clearer that Dave had been using Kelsey's illness as a way to control her and stay connected to her, maybe even to stay connected to me through her. Kelsey leaned into him while he talked, nodding along like this was all normal and healthy. I needed to be really careful here, but I also saw an opening to maybe plant some doubt. I shifted slightly so I could see both their faces and spoke in a gentle, thoughtful tone. I said that in my experience, real friends want each other to grow and become independent, not stay stuck reliving the past over and over. I watched Dave's expression darken immediately, his jaw tightening and his eyes going cold as he stared at me. But Kelsey's face showed something different, a kind of thoughtful confusion like she was actually considering what I'd said. I kept going, adding that the best thing anyone ever did for me after college was push me to make new connections and try new experiences, instead of holding on to what used to be. I said growth meant moving forward, not backward, and that people who really care about you want to see you build a full life with lots of different relationships and experiences. Kelsey's expression shifted as she processed this, her eyes moving between me and Dave like she was comparing two different versions of what friendship should look like. Then Kelsey did something that completely surprised me. She turned to look directly at Dave and asked him a question that was way more insightful than I expected. She asked if he thought she'd actually gotten better over the years, or if maybe he liked her needing him so much. Her voice was quiet but direct, and I could see real self-awareness in her eyes in that moment. Dave's face went through several expressions in quick succession: shock, anger, and then forced concern. He stumbled over his words trying to respond, saying of course he thought she'd gotten better, and that everything he'd done was to help her recovery. But his tone sounded defensive and uncertain, not like someone who genuinely believed what they were saying. He shot me a look of pure anger while trying to keep his voice calm for Kelsey, clearly furious that I'd planted this seed of doubt in her mind. Dave recovered fast, though, his face shifting into an expression of hurt and love. He pulled Kelsey into a tight hug and told her he loved her so much, and that everything he'd ever done was to protect her and make her happy. He kissed her forehead gently while keeping his eyes locked on me with a warning look that said I'd crossed a line. He said she was the most important person in his world, and he'd never do anything to hurt her or hold her back. His performance was convincing, hitting all the right emotional notes, and I watched Kelsey melt into his embrace completely. She wrapped her arms around him and apologized for even asking the question, saying she knew he cared about her. I could see how deeply his manipulation had worked over the years, how he'd positioned himself as her protector and supporter, while actually keeping her dependent and isolated. The hug lasted long enough to make his point to both of us, that he had control here, and Kelsey trusted him more than she trusted her own doubts. When they finally separated, I decided to take a risk and push a little further while Kelsey seemed more open. I suggested that maybe Kelsey and I could take a short walk together, just the two of us like we used to do around campus when we needed to talk or clear our heads. I kept my voice casual and friendly, like it was the most natural suggestion in the world. Kelsey's face lit up immediately and she stood up from the couch with excitement, saying she'd love that and we could walk down to the end of the road and back. She was already moving toward the door when Dave stood up fast and put his hand on her arm. He said it was too dark outside and not safe to be walking around at night in this area. His tone was firm and left no room for argument. Kelsey's excitement faded and she looked disappointed but didn't push back against him. I could see his real concern had nothing to do with safety, and everything to do with losing control of the situation if Kelsey and I were alone together outside where anything could happen. Right then, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went completely out, leaving us in darkness except for the candles burning on the dining table and coffee table. Dave swore under his breath and said the breaker probably tripped again, something that apparently happened a lot in this old house with bad wiring. The sudden darkness felt almost like an opportunity, a break in the careful control he'd been maintaining all evening. I stood up and said I could help check the breaker box if he wanted, trying to sound helpful and casual. My heart was racing because I knew the breaker box had to be outside, which meant a chance to get out of this house even if just for a minute. Dave hesitated, clearly not wanting to let me out of his sight but also needing to get the power back on. Kelsey said the breaker box was around back by the kitchen door and it was easy to flip. I volunteered again, saying I'd done it at my own apartment before, and it was no problem. After a long pause, Dave made a decision that surprised me. He said Kelsey and I could go check the breaker together while he stayed inside to make sure the house was secure and nothing was wrong. He handed Kelsey a small flashlight from a drawer and told us to go straight to the box and come right back. We walked through the dark kitchen to the back door, and I felt the cool night air hit my face as Kelsey pushed it open. Being outside after hours in that closed-up house felt amazing, even though I was still technically a prisoner. The stars were bright overhead and I could hear crickets in the distance. Kelsey led me around the side of the house to where a gray metal box hung on the wall. I moved close to her and whispered really fast that I'd stay and visit as much as she wanted if I could just text my family real quick so they wouldn't worry about me. I said people who care about each other don't want their loved ones to worry, appealing to her understanding of how families work and how my parents were probably getting concerned. Kelsey's face showed she was torn between wanting me to stay and not wanting to cause my family stress. She opened her mouth to respond, but before any words came out, the back door opened and Dave appeared in the doorway. His face looked suspicious and angry, like he'd known letting us out here alone was a mistake. He asked what we were talking about in a tone that wasn't really a question. Then he stepped past us and flipped the breaker switch himself with hard, angry movements. The lights inside the house came back on, spilling yellow light through the kitchen window. He put his hand on Kelsey's back and his other hand on my arm, not gentle, and ushered us both back inside immediately. My brief taste of freedom and fresh air was over in less than 2 minutes, and we were back in the controlled environment of the house where Dave could watch everything we did. Back in the living room with all the lights on now, I noticed my phone sitting on the side table, and Dave picked it up, his fingers moving across the screen. I realized he was probably checking my messages or social media, monitoring what people might be saying or looking for. My mind raced for any way to create another opportunity or distraction. Then I saw the dish towels hanging near the kitchen and got an idea. I walked over like I was just moving around to stretch, picked up one of the towels and then turned too fast on purpose. My elbow knocked into the candle sitting on the counter, sending it tipping over onto the towel. The flame caught the fabric immediately and smoke started rising fast and thick. I yelled and grabbed the towel, throwing it in the sink and turning on the water, but not before enough smoke had filled the kitchen to trigger the smoke detector mounted on the ceiling. The alarm started blaring, a piercing electronic shriek that hurt my ears and made Kelsey cover hers with her hands. In the chaos of the alarm and smoke and Dave rushing to deal with the situation, I moved fast toward the front door. My hands went to my hair and pulled out one of the bobby pins I always kept there to hold back my bangs. I'd learned to pick simple locks in college when my roommate kept locking herself out. Just basic pin tumbler stuff. The chain lock on the door was the kind with a sliding piece that rested in a U-shaped bracket. I worked the bobby pin into the tiny gap and pushed up on the chain while sliding it sideways. It popped partially loose, but I left it resting in place so it looked latched from a distance. If someone just glanced at the door, they'd think it was still secured. Dave was busy waving a towel at the smoke detector trying to get it to stop screaming, and Kelsey was standing frozen in the middle of the room with her hands still over her ears. Neither of them saw my quick work at the door, and I stepped away just as Dave finally got the alarm to shut off. Through the front window, I caught movement across the empty lot. A porch light flicked on at the neighbor's house and an older man stepped outside looking toward us. He stood there on his porch for what felt like forever, clearly having heard the alarm. My chest tightened with hope that someone knew something was wrong here. Dave noticed me staring and followed my gaze. He moved to the window and raised his hand in a casual wave, like everything was totally fine and normal. The neighbor hesitated, then waved back slowly before turning to go inside. My hope started sinking fast. Dave stepped away from the window and his eyes landed on the front door. His whole body went rigid. He moved toward it fast and grabbed the chain lock, testing it. The chain slid right out of the bracket where I'd loosened it, dangling uselessly in his hand. His face twisted with rage. He spun around and crossed the room in 3 steps, his hand shooting out to grab my upper arm. His fingers dug in hard enough that I knew there would be dark bruises tomorrow. The pain was sharp and instant. He yanked me toward him and his face was inches from mine. His breath smelled like coffee and anger. He demanded to know what I thought I was doing, his voice low and dangerous. I tried to pull away, but his grip only tightened. Kelsey made a small sound from across the room. I looked over and saw her pressed against the wall, her eyes wide and scared. She was staring at Dave like she didn't recognize him. The smoke smell still hung in the air and the whole situation was crashing down on her all at once. Her breathing started getting faster and faster. Her hands came up to cover her ears and she started rocking slightly. Tears ran down her face and she made these awful whimpering sounds. I recognized the signs from college. She was spiraling into a complete breakdown. Dave still had my arm in his grip, but his attention shifted to Kelsey. I twisted free and moved toward her, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage despite the pain in my arm and the fear making my hands shake. I knelt down in front of her and started the grounding exercise from before. I asked her to look at me and name 5 things she could see in the room. My voice stayed steady even though everything in me wanted to scream. Kelsey's eyes found mine and she struggled to focus. She whispered the couch, the table, the window, the door, her hands. I told her she was doing great and asked for 4 things she could touch. She reached out and touched my hand, the wall, her shirt, her own face. Her breathing was slowing down bit by bit. Dave stood there watching us, his jaw clenched tight. I could tell he hated that I could help her when he couldn't. I kept going with the exercise, asking for 3 things she could hear. Kelsey listed my voice, the house settling, Something outside. Her crying had mostly stopped and the rocking had slowed. She looked at me with clearer eyes and I saw the scared freshman I used to know, not the person who'd been part of this whole nightmare. She spoke through her tears and asked Dave if we could please go sit on the front porch for just a few minutes where it was quiet. Her voice was small and pleading. I held my breath waiting for his answer. Dave looked between us and I could see him calculating. A full breakdown would mess up whatever plan he had. He nodded once, short and angry, and moved to unlock the front door. My heart jumped. We were going outside. Kelsey stood up slowly and I helped steady her. We walked to the door together and Dave opened it, the cool night air rushing in. I stepped onto the small wooden porch with Kelsey beside me. The stars were visible overhead and I could hear crickets in the grass. Dave came out behind us but stayed near the door, watching. I positioned myself and Kelsey so we were facing the neighbor's house directly. The porch light was still on over there. I helped Kelsey sit down on the top step and sat next to her, talking quietly about breathing slowly and steadily. My mind raced with what to do next. I lifted my hand to my throat like I was adjusting my collar, then pointed toward the neighbor's house while pretending to gesture at the stars. I did it again, touching my neck and pointing, hoping it looked like distress. Kelsey was focused on her breathing and didn't notice. Across the lot, I saw movement at the neighbor's window. The curtain shifted and I caught a glimpse of the man's face. He was looking right at us. Then I saw him step back from the window and a moment later he appeared on his porch again. This time he had a phone in his hand. He lifted it to his ear. My pulse hammered in my throat. Dave must have sensed something was wrong because he suddenly stepped forward and grabbed both of our arms. His fingers wrapped around my already bruised arm, and I couldn't stop the small cry of pain. He hauled us both toward the door, his movements rough and urgent. That's when I heard it. Faint, but definitely there. Sirens in the distance. The sound made my whole body flood with relief and terror at the same time. Someone had called for help. Maybe the neighbor, maybe the rideshare company had finally noticed something wrong with the GPS tracking. Dave heard the sirens too, and his whole face changed. The control slipped, and what I saw underneath was pure panic. He shoved us toward the doorway, and I stumbled. My shoulder hit the wooden frame hard, and I felt something sharp catch my arm, probably a nail sticking out or rough splintered wood. Pain shot through me immediately, and I looked down to see blood running down my forearm, dark and wet in the porch light. It hurt worse than the bruises, sharp and burning. Kelsey saw the blood and something in her snapped. She screamed at Dave to stop hurting me, her voice loud and clear despite her earlier breakdown. She pushed at his chest with both hands. Dave looked shocked that she was standing up to him. The sirens were getting louder, maybe half a mile away now. I made a split-second choice. I reached up and grabbed the porch light fixture, yanking hard. The glass shattered in my hand, and I yelled toward the neighbor's house as loud as I could. I screamed about a gas leak and to get help. It was a complete lie, but I hoped it would make people respond faster. Across the lot, the neighbor's porch light went off and I heard a car engine start. He was either running from a fake explosion or going to get help more directly. Either way, he was taking action. Dave's panic turned to rage. He grabbed Kelsey by both shoulders and forced her to look at him. His voice came out harsh and desperate. He told her she had to choose right now between him and me. He said if she really loved him, she would help him fix this situation. Kelsey's face crumpled and she looked between us, her eyes wild with confusion and fear. The sirens were so much louder now, maybe just blocks away. Red and blue lights would be visible any second. I could see her struggling with years of dependence on Dave versus whatever protective feelings she had for me. My arm throbbed and blood dripped onto the wooden porch. I spoke to Kelsey as gently as I could manage with my voice shaking. I promised her I would come back and visit her properly, through the right channels and with proper support. I told her what was happening right now wasn't her fault at all. She didn't have to be part of Dave's choices and decisions. She could make her own choice to do the right thing. My words hung in the air between us while the sirens screamed closer and closer. Kelsey shoved Dave hard in the chest with both hands, and he stumbled backward off balance. She screamed at him that this wasn't what she wanted, that he was ruining everything, her voice breaking with anger and desperation. I didn't think or hesitate. I jumped off the porch and ran as fast as my legs would move across the dirt and weeds toward the neighbor's property. My arm throbbed and burned where the wood had cut me, and I could feel blood running down to my wrist, but I kept going. My lungs burned from the effort and my whole body shook with adrenaline, but I pushed harder. Behind me, I heard Dave yelling something, but I didn't look back. The neighbor's driveway was maybe 50 yards away, but it felt like miles. My feet pounded against the hard dirt and loose gravel, and I nearly tripped twice on the uneven ground. The sirens were so loud now they had to be just a few blocks away. I could see the neighbor's car backing out of the driveway, and I waved my arms desperately while running. The elderly woman behind the wheel saw me coming and her eyes went wide. I reached the car and banged on the passenger window with my good hand. I was gasping so hard I could barely speak, but I managed to get out that I'd been kidnapped and needed help. The woman looked absolutely scared, but she hit the unlock button and I yanked the door open. I practically fell into the passenger seat and she immediately locked the doors again. She grabbed her phone from the cup holder and hit redial. She told the 911 operator that the victim was with her now and gave them her address. Her hands were shaking as she handed me the phone. Through the back window, I could see Dave running to his car in front of Kelsey's house. He jumped in and the engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed everywhere as he tore down the dirt road heading away from us. Kelsey stood alone on the porch for just a second, and then her legs seemed to give out. She collapsed onto the steps and put her face in her hands. The dispatcher's voice came through the phone asking if I was safe now. I said yes and started giving them details about Dave's car while watching him disappear down the road. I described the make and model as best I could and the direction he was heading. The dispatcher said officers were less than a minute away and asked me to stay on the line. The neighbor woman reached over and squeezed my shoulder gently. She asked if I was hurt, and I looked down at my arm. Blood had soaked through my sleeve and dripped onto her car seat. I apologized, but she waved it off and said not to worry about that. Red and blue lights appeared at the end of the street, and suddenly there were police cars everywhere. 3 cruisers surrounded the house with their lights flashing, and officers jumped out. I told the dispatcher the police were here, and she said to follow their instructions. An officer approached our car carefully with his hand near his weapon. The neighbor rolled down her window and explained that I was the kidnapping victim. The officer's whole posture changed, and he immediately called for paramedics. He opened my door and helped me out of the car. I was shaking so badly I could barely stand, but I forced myself to focus. Another officer was approaching the house with his weapon drawn and calling out for anyone inside. I told them Kelsey was on the porch and not dangerous, that Dave had already left. I gave them a description of Dave and his vehicle and the direction he went. An officer got on his radio and put out an alert with all the information. Within seconds, more units were responding to search for him. A paramedic arrived and guided me to sit on the back of their ambulance. They started checking my vitals while I kept talking to the officers. I described Dave's height, weight, what he was wearing, everything I could remember. My arm was still bleeding, and the paramedic cut away my sleeve to see the wound better. Another paramedic was walking toward the porch where Kelsey still sat crying. A detective in plain clothes approached me with a notebook. He introduced himself, but I immediately forgot his name. He said he needed to take my statement while everything was still fresh in my memory. I nodded and started from the beginning. I told him about getting in the rideshare at the airport and recognizing something was wrong when Dave went the wrong direction. I explained about the GPS spoofing and how my phone showed I was home when I wasn't. I described arriving at the house and being forced inside with the knife. The detective wrote everything down and recorded it on his phone too. He took photos of my arm and the bruises on my other arm where Dave had grabbed me. He photographed my neck where I'd been making distress signals earlier. Every detail mattered for evidence, and I tried to remember everything clearly despite the shock and fear still pumping through me. The paramedic cleaned the cut on my arm and said it needed stitches but wasn't too deep. They wrapped it temporarily and said I'd need to go to the hospital. While they worked, I watched another person in plain clothes talking to Kelsey on the porch. This person was a woman, and she sat down next to Kelsey and spoke quietly. Kelsey was answering questions and nodding. She looked small and broken sitting there. The psychiatric liaison, I figured, assessing whether Kelsey was safe to herself or others. Kelsey wasn't fighting or resisting. She actually seemed almost relieved in a strange way. Like she was tired of pretending and hiding and living in this weird situation Dave had created. After a few minutes, the liaison stood up and helped Kelsey to her feet. They walked together toward an ambulance, and Kelsey went willingly. Just before they helped her inside, she turned and looked directly at me. Our eyes met across the yard, and I saw genuine sorry in her face. Not the manic obsession from inside the house, but real understanding that what happened was wrong. I nodded once to show I saw her. My feelings were too mixed up to sort out, but I could acknowledge that she was both someone who hurt me and someone who'd been used. They closed the ambulance doors, and it pulled away with lights, but no siren. The detective came back and said they'd spotted Dave heading east on the highway about 10 miles out. State police were coordinating to set up roadblocks at major intersections. He hadn't been stopped yet, though, and that made my stomach tight with worry. What if he came back? What if he tried to find me or hurt someone else? The detective must have seen my face because he assured me they had units watching my apartment and officers would stay with me. The paramedics said they needed to take me to the emergency room now for proper treatment. I got into the ambulance and we drove away from that house. At the hospital, the ER staff treated me with real kindness. They weren't just processing a case, but actually seeing me as a person who'd been through something horrible. A nurse carefully removed the temporary bandage and cleaned the wound thoroughly. The doctor came in and said I'd need 6 stitches. They numbed the area and worked carefully while I stared at the ceiling. Another nurse took photos of all my injuries for the legal case. They documented the cut, the bruises, everything. They gave me paperwork about trauma counseling services and victim support resources. A victim advocate stopped by to explain what would happen next with the legal process. By evening, I was lying in a hospital bed waiting to be discharged when the detective called my phone, which the police had recovered from Dave's car at a gas station where he'd dumped it. The detective said they had something important to show me. He arrived 20 minutes later with a tablet. He played doorbell camera footage from the neighbor's house that clearly showed Dave forcing me toward Kelsey's front door. You could see me trying to pull away and him grabbing my arm roughly. The video showed I was obviously scared and didn't want to go inside. This evidence would be critical for prosecution, he said. It proved I didn't visit willingly, and that Dave used force. I felt this wave of relief wash over me knowing there was proof. People would believe what happened because they could see it with their own eyes. The next morning, my phone rang while I was still at my sister's apartment where I'd stayed the night. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. A woman introduced herself as part of the rideshare company's trust and safety team and said they needed to talk to me about my ride. She explained they'd been investigating Dave's account after the police contacted them and found major problems with his GPS data. His location tracking showed impossible patterns like being in 2 places at once. He'd also been flagged multiple times before for taking routes that didn't match the app's directions. The company was working with police and had shut down thousands of suspicious driver accounts as a safety measure. She apologized repeatedly and said they took full responsibility for not catching the red flags sooner. I thanked her for calling and hung up feeling both validated and angry that he'd been allowed to keep driving at all. 3 days after I escaped, the detective called to tell me they'd arrested Dave at a motel 2 states away. He'd been spotted by a highway patrol officer who recognized his car from the alert. They brought him back and charged him with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and assault. The prosecutor filed paperwork asking the judge to hold him without bail because he was a flight risk. But at the hearing, the judge decided to grant bail with electronic monitoring and restraining orders keeping him away from both me and Kelsey. I felt sick knowing he was out there somewhere even with an ankle monitor. The detective assured me they'd be watching him closely, and I should call immediately if I saw anything suspicious. Moving back into my apartment felt wrong from the first moment I unlocked the door. Every sound made me jump. I checked the locks on windows and doors over and over, sometimes getting up 5 or 6 times in the night to make sure everything was secure. My sister packed a bag and stayed with me for the first week. She slept on my couch and came with me to appointments. I started seeing a therapist who worked specifically with people who'd been through bad situations. The nightmares were horrible and I'd wake up thinking I was back in that house. But the therapist helped me understand that my brain was just trying to process what happened. She said my reactions were completely normal, and that healing takes time. Having someone tell me I wasn't going crazy helped more than I expected. About 2 weeks after everything happened, the victim advocate called with an update about Kelsey. She'd been transferred to a structured outpatient program where she'd get intensive treatment while living in a supervised apartment building. The doctor said Kelsey was taking responsibility for her part in what happened and working on understanding boundaries in relationships. They thought she had a real chance at recovery this time with the right support. I felt relieved hearing that she was getting actual help instead of just being locked up. Part of me was still angry at her for everything, but another part remembered the scared girl from college who just needed someone to care about her. Over the next few weeks, I met with the prosecutor multiple times to prepare for testimony. We went over my statement again and again until I could tell the story without breaking down. She had me practice staying calm while talking about the scary parts. It was exhausting and brought everything back up when I was trying to move forward. But I was determined to see this through and make sure Dave faced real consequences. The prosecutor seemed confident we had a strong case with all the evidence. She showed me the doorbell camera footage, my recorded video from the car, and photos of my injuries. Everything was documented and clear. Around the same time, the rideshare company made a public announcement about new safety features. They were adding better verification for driver identities and technology to prevent GPS spoofing. They also built a real-time check-in system where riders could easily alert the company if something felt wrong during a trip. The announcement mentioned that changes came after a serious safety incident, though they didn't use my name. Knowing my horrible experience might protect other people from going through something similar helped me find some meaning in what happened. At least something good could come from it. 2 months after that terrible night, I sat in the courtroom for the preliminary hearing. The judge reviewed all the evidence, including the doorbell footage, my testimony, and the physical evidence from the house. Dave's lawyer tried to argue he was just helping Kelsey reconnect with an old friend, and things got out of hand. But the evidence of planning, the GPS spoofing, and the physical force made that defense sound ridiculous. The judge found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all charges. I felt a real sense of progress watching the legal system take this seriously and move forward with prosecution. A few days after the hearing, I drove to the neighbor's house with flowers and a thank you card. She invited me in for coffee and we sat at her kitchen table talking. She told me she almost didn't call for help at first because she thought it might just be a regular argument between people. But something about my signals through the window felt wrong to her. She said she was glad she trusted her instincts and called anyway. We talked about how important it is to look out for each other and not assume everything is fine when something feels off. I left her house feeling grateful that someone had paid attention when I desperately needed help. 2.5 months after that terrible night, I was settling into a new routine that felt almost normal. I saw my therapist twice a week and checked in regularly with the victim advocate who kept me updated on the legal process. The nightmares were less frequent, and I could sleep through most nights without getting up to check the locks. Through official channels, I heard that Kelsey was making real progress in her treatment program. Her therapist said she'd expressed genuine remorse and was working hard on recovery. Dave's trial was scheduled for next month, and I felt as ready as I'd ever be to testify and face him in court. I wasn't completely healed and probably never would be entirely, but I was functioning, working again, and slowly rebuilding my sense of safety in the world. That wraps up today's story. Notice how documenting everything and signaling for help made the difference? If you found this educational, subscribe for more content with practical survival lessons. Later.